The blaring horn of a pickup truck tore through the quiet morning, followed by a harsh shout. "Hurry up, old man! Some of us have places to be." The driver, a lean man in a worn denim jacket, leaned out of his rusted truck, his face contorted with impatience. The engine growled as he revved it, the vehicle jerking forward slightly as he fixed his glare on 82-year-old Samuel Whitaker, who stood rooted to the crosswalk, clutching a faded canvas tote. Samuel, a wiry figure with a slight stoop and silver hair glinting in the sunlight, stepped back onto the curb, his weathered hands tightening on the bag straps. He didn't flinch, didn't retort, just watched the truck peel away, tires screeching as the driver, Travis Kane, vanished around a corner in the small coastal town of Harborview. Samuel's hazel eyes, sharp despite his years, tracked the vehicle with a quiet resignation. He'd endured far worse in his time, moments of chaos and danger that made this fleeting rudeness pale in comparison. An hour later, Travis would discover that some actions send ripples far beyond their fleeting moment. Samuel Whitaker lived a life of quiet discipline in Harborview, a town where the tang of sea salt mingled with the rhythm of daily routines. His modest one-bedroom apartment, perched above a hardware store, was a study in simplicity. Walls adorned with faded photographs from decades past, a single shelf holding well-loved books, histories, memoirs, and the occasional novel. The air carried the faint scent of linseed oil and aged leather, a testament to the care he took in maintaining his small sanctuary. At 82, Samuel was lean, his movements measured, his hands betraying a subtle tremor when he lingered too long over a page. His days unfolded with predictable grace, morning walks along the harbor's edge, where gulls wheeled overhead, a cup of black coffee at Sally's Diner, where he'd nod politely to familiar faces, and afternoons at the community center, organizing book drives or tutoring adults chasing their GEDs. To the townsfolk, he was Sam, the soft-spoken retiree who tipped his hat and kept to himself. Few suspected the weight of his past, the jungle patrols, the covert missions, the nights spent under hostile skies, navigating dangers that remained locked in classified files. His service was a private burden, worn like a hidden scar, visible only to those who knew where to look. That Wednesday morning, Samuel was returning from the community center, his tote bag heavy with donated paperbacks. Dog-eared histories and biographies he'd sort for the next book drive. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across Harborview's main street, a stretch of weathered storefronts punctuated by touristy boutiques selling seashell trinkets. He paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, his eyes scanning the traffic with the instincts of a man trained to notice details. That's when Travis's truck roared up, its front bumper nudging into the pedestrian lane, too close to the curb. Travis, in his early 30s, was a bundle of restless energy, tattooed forearms, a perpetual scowl, and a chip on his shoulder as big as the rusted toolbox rattling in his truck bed. Late for a construction job on the town's outskirts, he saw Samuel's pause as a personal slight, an obstacle to his already fraying patience. "You deaf or something?" Travis barked, slamming the horn again. "Cross or move." Samuel turned, startled but calm, his voice steady. "Just waiting for the light, friend." The word friend was soft, almost deferential, but it seemed to spark something in Travis. "Friend? I ain't your friend, Pops. Get moving." He gestured sharply, his hand cutting through the air. Samuel stepped back, not out of fear, but to de-escalate, his instincts honed by years of navigating tense situations. Travis, misreading the move as defiance, leaned further out his window. "What, you own the street now? Move it." When Samuel didn't budge fast enough, still assessing the flow of cars, Travis's frustration boiled over. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, swung open the door and stepped out, towering over Samuel with a frame taut with irritation. "You're wasting my time, old man," he growled, and with a quick, careless shove, he pushed Samuel toward the curb. The shove wasn't vicious, but it was enough. Samuel stumbled, his balance faltering on the uneven pavement. His tote bag slipped, spilling books across the crosswalk in a cascade of worn covers. He caught himself on one knee, his palms scraping the asphalt, a thin line of blood welling up. Travis didn't linger to see the damage. Muttering curses, he climbed back into his truck, slammed the door, and sped off, leaving Samuel amid his scattered belongings. A few passers-by paused. A woman with a shopping bag, a jogger with earbuds dangling. But their concern was fleeting. They muttered sympathies, shook their heads, and hurried on, caught in the tide of their own lives. Only one figure lingered, a man in his 40s, seated in a parked sedan across the street, his face half hidden by sunglasses. His fingers tapped a rhythm on the steering wheel before he reached for a phone, his eyes never leaving the scene. Samuel dusted off his trousers, his movements slow but precise. Ignoring the sting in his hand and the ache in his knee, he focused on gathering his books, stacking them carefully back into the bag. A young woman, likely a barista from the nearby coffee shop, rushed over, her apron dusted with flour. "Oh my gosh, sir, are you okay? That guy was awful." She knelt to help, piling the books neatly. Samuel offered a faint smile, his voice gentle. "I'm fine, miss, just a stumble." He tucked the last book away, dabbed his scraped hand with a handkerchief, and thanked her warmly. "Should we call someone?" she asked, her brow creased with worry. Samuel shook his head. "No need for a fuss. He's gone now." He didn't want trouble, didn't crave attention. He just wanted to keep moving. With a final nod, he crossed the street, his steps a touch slower, his posture a shade more guarded. Unseen by Samuel, the man in the sedan was already speaking into his phone, his voice low and precise. "Observer to base. Incident at Harborview and Pine. Civilian male, elderly, likely former operative based on profile. Assaulted by local male, mid-30s, driving a gray Ford pickup. Plate number." He rattled off the details with professional calm. "Subject Whitaker is unharmed, continuing on foot. Request guidance on local asset response protocols." He listened, nodded, and ended the call, his gaze fixed on the street where Travis's truck had disappeared. The gears of consequence were turning, invisible but relentless, set in motion by a single careless act. Travis, oblivious to the storm brewing, was halfway across town, pulling into the gravel lot of the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar on Harborview's industrial edge. The bar was a squat, weathered building, its neon sign flickering weakly in the daylight, promising cheap beer and greasy food. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fried onions and stale liquor, the jukebox blaring country tunes that barely drowned out the chatter. Travis slid into a booth with a couple of buddies, day laborers like him, rough-edged and quick to laugh at his bravado. "You should have seen it," he bragged, cracking open a beer. "Some old geezer hogging the crosswalk, acting like he's got nowhere to be. Gave him a nudge, and he went down like a cheap tent." His friends chuckled, slapping the table, their voices loud and careless. Travis leaned back, feeling untouchable, the incident already fading into a story to inflate his ego. Outside, the world was shifting in ways Travis couldn't perceive. A plain white van, the kind used by delivery drivers, pulled into a lot across the street, its tinted windows obscuring the occupants. Two men in workman's coveralls stepped out, carrying toolkits and a ladder, setting up near a telephone pole as if inspecting it. Their movements were too precise, too practiced for mere utility workers. A black SUV with no visible markings cruised past the bar, slowing briefly before circling back. High above, the faint hum of a drone blended with the coastal wind, its path circling the industrial outskirts of Harborview. None of this registered with Travis or his crew, who were deep into their second round, laughing over another exaggerated tale of his morning exploits. Back at his apartment, Samuel settled into his routine. He cleaned the scrape on his hand with antiseptic from a small first aid kit, wincing slightly at the sting but brushing it off. He made a simple lunch, vegetable soup and a slice of rye bread, then sat at his kitchen table, flipping through a donated book on naval warfare. The morning's incident lingered, not as anger, but as a quiet weight, a reminder of how the world sometimes saw him, old, irrelevant, an obstacle. He pushed the thought aside, as he'd done with countless others, and lost himself in the pages, the familiar rhythm of routine grounding him. What he didn't know was that his brief encounter had sparked a chain reaction, one that reached far beyond Harborview's sleepy streets and into the shadows of a world he'd left behind. Across town, the door of the Rusty Anchor swung open with a heavy creak, cutting through the bar's noise like a blade. The jukebox faltered, skipping a beat, as two men stepped inside. They weren't physically imposing, Average builds, dark jeans, plain jackets. But their presence was electric, a quiet intensity that silenced the room. Their eyes swept the bar with surgical precision, cataloging faces, exits, and potential threats in an instant. Behind them, the open door revealed two more figures stationed outside, their postures relaxed but alert, their presence blocking any easy escape. The air grew thick, the bar's usual bravado replaced by a tense hush that seemed to press against the walls. The two men moved toward Travis's booth with a fluid, almost choreographed grace, their steps silent despite the creaky floorboards. Travis, mid-sentence, froze, his beer bottle hovering near his lips. His friends shifted uncomfortably, their laughter dying out, their eyes darting nervously. The lead man stopped a few feet from the table, his hands clasped loosely, his gaze locked on Travis with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. "Travis Kane," he said, his voice low but clear, not a question but a statement. Travis bristled, falling back on bravado to mask his unease. "Yeah, who's asking?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the nerves creeping up his spine. The man ignored the question, his expression unreadable. "This morning at the corner of Harbor View and Pine, you had an altercation with an elderly man. You pushed him. He fell." His tone was calm, almost conversational, but there was a steel beneath it that made Travis's stomach twist. "How'd you?" Travis started, then stopped, his mind racing. How could they know? He hadn't told anyone the specifics, not really. "He was in my way," he muttered, his voice weaker now, the bravado draining away. "Didn't mean nothing by it." The second man spoke, his voice colder, sharper, cutting through the air like a knife. "You put your hands on Samuel Whitaker, a man who's walked through hells you can't even dream of, who's carried burdens heavier than that truck you drive, all because he delayed you for 10 seconds. Travis's face paled. The name, Samuel Whitaker, meaning nothing to him, but the way these men said it, the gravity they gave it, made his chest tighten with a growing sense of dread. The lead man leaned in slightly, his eyes never leaving Travis's, his presence seeming to fill the room. "Mr. Whitaker is a retired Colonel Special Forces. His service record includes operations that remain classified, missions that ensured people like you could sleep safely at night. He's a national asset, and his well-being is of interest to certain organizations." He paused, letting the words sink in, each one landing like a stone. "Organizations that take disrespect, especially physical disrespect, very seriously." Travis was sweating now, his hands trembling around the beer bottle, the glass slick in his grip. His friends avoided his gaze, their earlier camaraderie replaced by a palpable unease, their eyes fixed on the table or the floor. "I didn't know," Travis stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I swear, I didn't mean..." The lead man cut him off with a raised hand, the gesture sharp and final. "Intent is irrelevant. What matters is consequence. You crossed a line, Mr. Kane. You need to understand what that means." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, each word crystal clear in the silent bar. "You will never approach Samuel Whitaker again. You will not speak to him, look at him, or occupy the same space as him. If you see him on the street, you cross to the other side. If you're driving, you take the next turn. You will become invisible to him. Are we clear?" Travis nodded frantically, his throat too dry to speak at first. "Yes, sir, clear," he managed, his voice shaking. The second man tilted his head, his expression unreadable, his eyes cold and analytical. "One more thing. Your current lifestyle," he said, glancing at the construction logo on Travis's jacket, the faded denim patched with grease stains. "The loud truck, the attitude, it draws attention, the wrong kind. People who value discretion might decide it's too much noise. You'd be wise to dial it down." The men turned as one, their movements synchronized, and walked out, the door closing softly behind them. The bar remained silent for a long moment, the weight of their presence lingering like a chill in the air. Travis's friends exchanged uneasy glances, their beers untouched, their earlier bravado gone. "Who the hell were those guys?" one whispered, his voice barely audible. Travis didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart was pounding, his mind replaying the encounter, the unshakable certainty in those men's eyes. He'd felt it, a sense that he'd brushed against something vast, something dangerous, something he couldn't outrun or outtalk. He stumbled out of the booth, knocking over his beer in his haste, the liquid pooling on the table. "I gotta go," he muttered, ignoring his friend's questions, their voices fading as he pushed through the bar's heavy door. Outside, the air was cool, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. He fumbled with his truck keys, his hands shaking, and drove straight home, not daring to glance at the empty street behind him. The van, the SUV, the drone, they were gone, as if they'd never been there. But the fear stayed, a cold knot in his gut, a weight that followed him through the night. Travis didn't sleep, his mind racing with the realization that his careless shove had been the stupidest, most dangerous mistake of his life. By morning, he was packing a bag, telling anyone who'd listen he was leaving Harborview for good. His truck, once his pride and joy, sat abandoned in the lot, gathering dust, its rusted frame a silent testament to his hasty exit. Samuel, unaware of the storm he'd unwittingly sparked, went about his day with the same quiet dignity that had always defined him. He walked to Sally's diner, the familiar creak of the door greeting him as he stepped inside. He ordered his usual black coffee, exchanging small talk with the waitress, Ellie, who called him Han, and refilled his mug with a smile. He didn't notice the quiet sedan that trailed him at a distance, its driver noting his routine with a professional eye, jotting details in a small notebook. He didn't know about the phone calls, the reports filed, the unseen network that had mobilized in his defense, a web of loyalty and obligation stretching back decades. To him, the morning's incident was just another fleeting indignity, one of many he'd learned to let go, filed away like the memories of firefights and covert drops he'd never speak of. That evening, Samuel sat in his worn armchair, a book open on his lap, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows across his small apartment. The room was quiet, save for the faint tick of a clock and the occasional creak of the building settling. He drifted off, the book slipping slightly, his dreams carrying him back to distant nights. Desert winds whispering through sand dunes, whispered orders in the dark, the camaraderie of men who trusted him with their lives. The world outside moved on, but for Samuel it was enough to sit quietly, to live simply, to carry his past with the understated grace he'd always shown. Weeks later, Harborview felt different, though no one could pinpoint why. The Rusty Anchor was quieter, its rowdiest patrons suddenly scarce, their usual tables empty. Travis was gone, his name mentioned only in hushed tones. A cautionary tale about crossing the wrong people, or perhaps the wrong person. Rumors swirled. He'd left town abruptly, sold his truck for cheap, headed north to start over somewhere quieter, somewhere he could fade into the background. Samuel continued his walks, his coffee, his book drives, unaware of the invisible shield around him, the silent guardians who honored a debt from decades past, forged in the crucible of missions long buried in classified files. His life remained small, unassuming, but it was a life that mattered, protected by forces he'd never see, forces that moved in the shadows to ensure his quiet days went undisturbed. As the weeks turned to months, Samuel found a renewed sense of purpose in his routine. He began spending more time at the community center, mentoring a group of young adults preparing for their GEDs. Their stories, tales of struggle and small triumphs, reminded him of the resilience he'd seen in his comrades years ago. One evening, as he helped a young man parse a particularly tricky history passage, the man looked up and said, "You're real patient, Sam. Bet you've got some stories of your own." Samuel smiled, his eyes crinkling, and said only, "Oh, a few. Nothing worth telling." But the warmth in his voice, the steady calm of his presence, told a different story. One of a life lived with purpose, even if its greatest chapters remained unwritten. One crisp morning, as Samuel walked along the harbor, he noticed a new bench overlooking the water, its plaque gleaming in the sunlight. It read, "In honor of Harborview's quiet heroes, whose strength endures." No name was listed, no explanation given, but Samuel paused, his fingers brushing the plaque, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He didn't know who'd placed it there, didn't know it was a quiet tribute from those who watched over him, a nod to the man whose service had not been forgotten. He sat for a moment, the sea breeze cool against his face, and felt a rare sense of peace, as if the world had righted itself, if only for a moment. Harborview carried on, its rhythms unchanged, but beneath the surface a quiet understanding had taken root. Respect, it seemed, was not optional, not for those who'd sacrificed in silence, not for those whose echoes carried the weight of unspoken valor. Samuel's life, simple as it appeared, was a testament to that truth, a reminder that even the quietest souls could cast the longest shadows. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more tales of quiet strength and hidden consequences.